The tape recordings you are about to hear were recorded in undisclosed locations more than 20 years ago. They were made on an old microcassette recorder and have never been played publicly before. Some of the things that are said may be both difficult to understand due to the quality of the tapes and troubling to hear due to content. Listener discretion is advised.
Do you see that day they left that bomb? They left it at the
They left it just
there.
right there.
But did
the
they-
thing over the street here.
Did they give a warning or what?
They give 3 warnings.
I'm in the town center of Omagh in Northern Ireland. I'm with Michael Gallagher, whose son Aidan was killed 26 years ago in the single worst bombing of the Northern Ireland conflict.
There's 31 mayors to represent the 31 people that died, including 2 unborn children. These reflective mirrors are supposed to shine light from there onto these mirrors, which in turn sends it down the street, and you'll see further mirrors on a lamppost.
Yeah.
And then at the bomb site where the car was parked, there's a glass obelisk, and it's supposed to light up a light in that, but
Does it work?
it never worked. It never worked from the... That cost... Somebody got a lot of money. Somebody got 250,000 for it.
We're looking for Aidan's name on the memorial erected to honor the 31 innocent people from Ireland, England, and Spain killed by that bomb. Another 220 people were injured in the blast, many of them severely. The carnage dwarfed all the other atrocities in the previous 30 years of guerrilla warfare in Northern Ireland. The memorial garden is actually closed for maintenance, so we have to push aside a metal barricade to get in.
So we're not going to get arrested here. Oh, they should be all right.
You're all right. Them guys are all right. Brian, you read Brian. Brian died and his father died.
Avril Monaghan,
That was a
husband.
woman that died, had twins, unborn.
Oh, yeah.
Avril Monaghan was a young mother, days away from giving birth to twins. Avril was in Omagh to buy her eldest child's first school uniform when she and her mother were caught in the explosion.
To honour and remember those murdered and hundreds injured from 3 nations by a dissident Republican terrorist car bomb.
The so-called dissident Republican groups had continually refused to engage in any peace process that didn't fully eliminate the British presence in Northern Ireland. They wanted reunification immediately and the British gone. The bombing in Omagh came just a few months after the Good Friday Agreement, a peace accord that was widely embraced on both sides of the border.
Okay, there we go. Aidan and... No.
Aidan, that's Adrian was his name, but we
Okay.
called him Aidan
Okay.
in short. Aidan Gallagher,
Okay.
Omagh. Yeah.
So he was 21,
He was 21.
when this happened, so
Yeah.
he'd be 46 now?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Because the friend that was with him has long since married and has 2 beautiful girls. So, you know, that's one of the things you do miss out. He was her only son. We had 2 girls. Yeah, you just wonder what should have been. You know, that's the unfortunate thing in life. Aidan didn't have any choice in it. He just went in that day to buy a pair of jeans.
He was not a combatant on either
Oh,
side. He was,
not at
you know,
the last thing in
Yeah.
the world. I mean, his friends were Protestant and Catholic. He was going in to buy the jeans, and he just stood in the doorway, and he said, he was asking questions like, you know, what size am I? And because my wife normally would have bought them. So I says, don't worry about it. They'll put a tape on you anyway. And we had that nice conversation, which doesn't always happen
yeah.
with parents and young people. And I'll never forget, as he walked out the hall and he looked back for the last time and he says, I won't be long. And that was the last time we seen Aidan. And that's something we're not allowed to say now. When we walk out the door, it'll not be long.
I'm Abden Palish.
I'm Bob Hergeth.
In partnership with Entropy Media,
This is Underbelly, the rebel kind.
I went upstairs, and from the upstairs window I could see a plume of smoke from a distance.
Most of the people that knew anything was going on knew there was something wrong with Omagh from the very beginning, as soon as they heard about it.
The oldest question in the world is who gained? Who gained most from it?
It was a new beginning for us. We were looking forward to living in peace.
As the clearance operation continues here in Omagh this evening, the full scale of the carnage and devastation caused is becoming only too clear. It's now emerged that amongst the many dead and injured were women and small children who just a few hours ago were shopping in these shops behind me here for back-to-school uniforms.
Words cannot capture how devastating the events of Omagh were. Northern Ireland's violence had been going on since the late 1960s, and there had been hundreds of bombs set off in the UK, Northern Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland. And not just on land. In 1979, the IRA blew up a fishing boat with members of the extended royal family on it. Within about an hour on a single day in 1972, at least 19 IRA bombs exploded in Belfast on what's referred to as Bloody Friday. Sometimes the violence was targeted. Sometimes the violence was indiscriminate. Omagh was the turning point. The majority of citizens on both sides of the political divide voted for the peace negotiated in the Good Friday Agreement a few months earlier. That means Catholics, Protestants, nationalists, and loyalists all significantly agreed with the peace. But some militant groups, like the emerging Real IRA or the Continuity IRA, saw it as another surrender to the Brits and sought to continue the violence. That campaign came to Omagh on August 15, 1998.
This is a holiday weekend, right? The place was alive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's the best day of the year, actually. The weather was very poor up to that point.
As Michael Gallagher describes it, it was a lovely late summer day. Parents had their children in the town center to buy clothes and other supplies for the start of the school year. A group of students was visiting from Spain. Terrorism isn't always about carnage. It's about fear and instability. As we've noted before, it's about saying, see what we could do if we didn't give you a warning. Like many IRA bombings before it, warnings were called in so civilians could, in theory, be evacuated with moments to spare.
What basically happened was, in the two of the three calls, the caller mentioned near the courthouse, and you're right here. You're in Omagh now, and you can see where the courthouse is. You know, as you walk up, there's a hell of a dip in this.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that building across there, across the top. Was the spire behind it is a church. That's a courthouse.
Yes.
Now, it's a lot longer than what it looks here because you've got that dip, right?
As we stand along Omagh's main drag, Michael points out the distance between where the caller said the bomb was and where it actually had been placed. The distance is considerable.
So what happened was they mentioned the courthouse. The police would naturally see the courthouse as a legitimate target.
Yeah.
They would say, it's, the Real IRA would say it's a prime target.
Yes.
And so all their resources were deployed in that area. And they felt the further they could put people from that building, the safer they were, unknown that the bomb car was parked here. First warning they gave was to the Samaritans. I don't know if you know what the Samaritans is. They're a voluntary group.
Okay.
That if you feel suicidal, you can phone them and they'll help you. That's basically what the Samaritans is. So they phoned the Samaritans here in Omagh, but what happened, that day it wasn't open, that Saturday. So it was automatically transferred to Coleraine. That call went in, and then UTV, which is one of our local TV stations, they got two calls to say that there was a bomb in Omagh. And of those three calls, in two of them, the caller mentioned near the courthouse. Well, if you've been to the town, the courthouse is
there.
at the very far end of the town,
Top of the
and the
town.
bomb was down here. So they rushed to the wrong side. So the police, naturally enough, thought the further we take people from the courthouse, the safer they are.
That day began as an ordinary summer day for Michael and his family. A typical Saturday to shop, run errands, and enjoy the nice weather. Omagh was a small town whose name comes from an Irish word for sacred plain. It wasn't a regular target for militant attacks. None of the holiday weekend shoppers saw what was coming.
He had been out paying some bills and he came back in again, and he said that he was going to go downtown and buy a pair of jeans, and he went downtown, and our youngest daughter also went downtown. She went to a fruit and veg shop. She's a vegetarian, so she always liked lots of fruit and veg. But she had just came back into the house, and there was an almighty explosion. And she had thought that my wife had put on the vacuum cleaner because she'd seen her putting the vacuum cleaner. Something had happened with the vacuum cleaner, but it was obvious that it was something had happened in the town. I went upstairs, and from the upstairs window I could see a plume of smoke from a distance, and it knew it was a town centre. And we put on the TV, and on the TV it said that there had been a serious explosion in the centre of Omagh, and there was fatalities. And then shortly after that, we seen the Prime Minister Tony Blair come on the TV, and I remember saying, "Put the TV off, and please don't put it back on again." But we waited and waited to see if Aidan would come back or there was any communication. Eventually, I left and I went to our local hospital, and as I drove towards the town, I seen people walking out of the town with blood streaming from their upper body, particularly their face. It was just it was disturbing. And I got to the hospital and it was total chaos. There was people up lying about and there was people injured everywhere. And I went through the hospital, but I couldn't find Aidan. And then I came back home to see if he had arrived back home, but he didn't. I actually went again to the hospital and came back, and then I went final time to the hospital, and on the third time I found Michael Barrett, his friend, was in hospital, and I said, "What happened? Do you know where Aidan is?" And he said, "The last thing I remember is we were evacuated and we were both walking down the middle of the street along with a large number of other people, and he says, the next thing I remember is flying through the air. I don't remember any more." We were advised to go to the local leisure centre where all the information was being collated. I think I was there till about 1:30 in the morning, when eventually I was called into a room with two police officers, a male and a female, and they started asking me questions about Aidan, had he any identifying marks, any scars, any tattoos, and we talked through this. At this time, I was getting really concerned and worried. And I remember saying to them, "We've heard a lot about the injured, that they were taken to every hospital in Northern Ireland because the amount of injuries, people injured, were so great. I think there was about 250 people injured." Shortly after that, we were taken to the local army camp where the temporary mortuary was set up. And me and my younger brother identified Aidan. And then I had to go home in the early hours of the morning. I remember the sun was starting to rise and I could hear the birds and the singing. That was just a total nightmare of going back home and walking into the room and having to tell my wife Patsy and Sharon and Kathy that Aidan wouldn't be coming home.
Aidan Gallagher was 21 years old when he died. he worked at his own car mechanic shop and considered moving to Boston. As a parent, it's difficult to fathom the grief Michael must still feel to this day.
Those 30 years were very difficult for everybody that lived here in Northern Ireland, and it didn't matter whether you're from the Catholic or Protestant community. You could cut the tension almost with a knife in the atmosphere. It was horrendous. And that was one of the ironies of Omagh, was that when we got the peace process in April 1998, everybody, Protestant, Catholic, all people relaxed because they felt that it was a new beginning for us. We were looking forward to living in peace. We could let our children out and they could go out and socialise and, party with their friends at the weekend, and we didn't need to worry about them. And then in August, we had the Omagh bomb, which, people often describe the Omagh bomb as the worst atrocity of the Troubles. Well, how I describe it is the first atrocity of peacetime.
As Michael says, the Good Friday Agreement brought peace and hope and should have signaled the end of the Troubles for the people of Northern Ireland. I asked him what he thought about the motivation of the bombers.
There's a lot of strange things about Omagh. The 11 days before Omagh, there was a phone call to the police in Omagh saying there was going to be a terrorist attack on police in Omagh on the 15th of August. See right across here, there was a massive yellow barrier, and that's naturally where you would get the police and the military would be there to control this point. So if you park a car bomb here, you're going to get them. I still believe that it definitely was an attack on police, because that was a control point. And when a bomb threat came, that was the first place the police or the army would have set up a checkpoint. So they were actually trying to get, in my opinion, the police and the army.
It's difficult to reckon with an atrocity like Omagh, and it's even more difficult given the confusing circumstances. For Dave Rupert, this was exactly the kind of tragedy he had hoped to prevent. It turns out he was closer to those responsible than he realized. The day of the Omagh bombing, Dave and Maureen had set out to hike Ben Bulben, the iconic mountain that inspired poet William Butler Yeats.
Saturday afternoon, about 2 o'clock, I remember we hiked up the mountain and came home, and that's what I thought on TV.
Dave panics. He sends an email to his handlers in the FBI and MI5.
Here's the deal. I am scared as hell. Maureen does not know enough to be scared, so she's okay. I don't know where I stand as far as the internment deal they are talking of. Obviously, they know I am very involved and have been here for a long time. I don't expect them to intern me, but I do expect to get lifted before the end of the week. I don't have a problem with that. I can take the heat. But if they expel me from Ireland, what have we gained? I am screwed very deep in the fabric of the organization now. They are dependent on me not only for money, but for this computer attack they plan. I have been afforded full protection, if you consider being protected by a group who can't start a parade on time as full protection. I do not want to appear at the first sign of trouble that I want to run. On the other hand, I think it might be a prudent thing to do now.
I went up the bar to meet Joe O'Neill that night, and Joe was visibly shaken. That's why I thought at the time, and I think I reflected that in emails, that he'd be the first one to say, well, there's going to be collateral damage, and I just always thought that he knew what he did.
For militant Republicans, collateral damage and death is just part of life in the war against the Brits. They can sleep better at night by arguing it's for the greater good, and that they didn't start the whole affair. Dave always explained the IRA logic like this. If a bomb set off by the IRA injures or kills anyone, they're a victim of the British oppression, because if the Brits weren't here, the bomb wouldn't have happened. That's what he alludes to when he says Joe O'Neill would be the first to rationalize collateral damage.
They'll go put a car bomb somewhere and whoever there happens to get killed. And then they say it's collateral damage. You know, their view of collateral damage is, I point a gun at you, you don't duck, and I shoot you, and that's your fault because you didn't duck. All that happened because the Brits are still burning out.
But in the case of Omagh, even Joe was freaked out. It was too much and too close to home. Dave sends another email after visiting Joe's bar in the wake of the blast.
Obviously, the Omagh bomb was the height of conversation at the bar tonight. Kernine's immediate answer was it was a 32-county deal because they had used a 32-county code word.
He's referring to the 32-county sovereignty movement, what's referred to as the political wing of the Real IRA.
He then said it had to be a mistake, being the one who calls a warning in isn't the driver who places the bomb, and they may not have been able to get it to where it was supposed to be, and it just turned into an accident. Joe was quite upset about the deal and only said that if it were in downtown London, it would have been a good deal, or if it had been 26 British soldiers. I was also told that as Republicans we could not condemn it because if the British were not in Ireland, there would not have been a bomb. I need to know what to do here. If the heat starts coming out heavy from the Garda, do we pack it in as I am told? But I do not know what to expect here, so I am looking for direction.
Dave is panicking because the reaction to the Omagh bomb across Ireland was pure outrage. As far as anyone in Ireland knows, Dave is a known associate of the Continuity IRA. He fears retaliation and wants to get out of Ireland as quickly as possible. Joe O'Neill tells him to fly home, and he does. But when he arrives back in Chicago, he realizes the weight of the Omagh bomb is not nearly as heavy for some. Another email.
As for the Omagh bomb, horrified is probably not a word I would use. Surprisingly enough, Americans feel very detached if it doesn't happen to Americans. Next, they are pretty resilient to killings, though this most certainly would be of an exceptional magnitude. I just haven't seen any big horror. They heard of it and basically shrug their shoulders and go on. As for responsibility, if you're speaking about Republican Americans I remain with, as I explained, they most certainly do believe the British withheld the correct location of the bomb to create the massacre that happened. They use evidence that if it wasn't, why was there no RUC or British troops hurt or killed?
Dave says the Republicans he talks to back in the U.S. shrug off the carnage in Omagh and blame the British security forces for not doing a better job preventing it, based on clues from their informants. This was a popular theory with Republicans, including Colin Fagan.
Most of the people that knew anything was going on knew there was something wrong with Omagh from the very beginning, as soon as they heard about it, because it was supposedly a warning time, but then it said it was no warning. Then they said, oh, well, the warning was, but if the right car had been moved. There was so much stir and churn around it that it was a terrible, terrible event. And a lot of people just said, that's it. I want nothing more to do with anything like that. But the people that were involved that to this day don't believe that Omagh happened in a vacuum. Blowing up the middle of Omagh, which is a Republican town, was the intended outcome of that. And then with the Gardaí has never followed up on their and their quote unquote investigation about following the car and then forgetting about it and letting it go, and about having eyes on it and for a week before the event, of knowing who everybody involved in it and made no attempt to stop it. And on the northern side of the border, how come everything was let go?
Dave dismisses the theory that police or British security let Omagh happen. Some have suggested they wanted to further turn the tide of public opinion against the IRA splinter groups. Dave says it was solely the fault of the bombers.
That just didn't happen. We were food I learned about from the Republican side, learned about how seriously, like all the Irish politicians were on bed with the Brits. And where I found it, it was au contraire.
Numerous official inquiries and inquests have failed to hold the perpetrators accountable. They've also failed to definitively answer key questions about Omagh that residents still ask. Should British intelligence have made more of the tips coming into them that something was planned by dissident groups that weekend? Did they know the something was planned for the town of Omagh? Should the police on the scene that day have been able to understand the confusing warnings better so as not to herd people toward the bomb? Helping us to make sense of all this is Politico reporter Sean Pagachnik, who you've heard from before.
The spectacular own goal. And that's what Omagh was. Now, people forget this, but I covered every single bombing in 1998. And there were a whole string of car bombings starting in January 1998 in Moira, a commuter town about 30 miles west of Belfast, and then in Lisburn, which is kind of the British Army headquarters town, Banbridge, which is kind of a police garrison town southwest of Belfast. Yeah. The difference was warnings were phoned in, and then, the Real IRA was playing this game that the provisional IRA had perfected over the years of giving a warning that was just long enough to give them time to evacuate so they wouldn't get the bad press of killing a whole bunch of civilians, but not enough time to defuse the bomb. So you'd get like 45 minutes to, the bomb's on this street, you got 45 minutes, and there'd be all these incredibly near-miss explosions. But that was the game, the dangerous game that the Real IRA was playing in 1998, which of course was the year of the Good Friday Agreement. In the run-up to the striking of the deal, there were several Real IRA bombs. All these close-miss diffusings or explosions after a street had been evacuated.
Car bombs had long been a signature of the IRA, and as Sean points out, none of them until Omagh had been so devastating. That's because something changed this time.
And all the time, the police were looking for the one car on the street that didn't look right. If you have a car bomb that's got 500 to 1,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate-based, fertilizer-based bomb, the suspension will sag. So you'll be looking for the car that's riding low. And what happened with Omagh was that they had reinforced the suspension. So the car looked normal. They didn't want the bomb to be diffused. They didn't want it to be detected too quickly. So they reinforced the suspension so that they couldn't see there was a big, heavy load of explosives on it. And of course, they had actually been doing the same thing they had been getting away with time and time again since January of that year. That just, blaming the Brits if anybody got injured. They were having their cake and eating it too. They were putting bombs in public places, and they were counting on the professionalism of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, as it then was, to identify the bomb, get the area evacuated, and save the day, just in the nick of time. And that didn't happen in Omagh.
The Real IRA, led by Mickey McKevitt, issued a statement taking responsibility for the bomb. But the story that would later trickle out is that the Real IRA stole the car and put the bomb in it. They handed it over to the Continuity IRA, which screwed up because they allegedly couldn't find a parking spot near the courthouse.
There's several layers of nonsense to unravel there. The first is the bomb would have been placed well before any police activity. You put the bomb and then the police are called. One of the interesting details that came out, there were 3 calls. 2 of them were to the Samaritans' office in Coleraine, a predominantly Protestant university town in the north of Northern Ireland. The caller was from County Louth on the border.
These calls were also mentioned by Michael Gallagher. 2 warning calls went to the Samaritans volunteer group, and a 3rd went to a television station.
The fact is the gal in Coleraine could not understand the guy because his clipped vowels and whatnot. They used a particular code word, Martha Pope, who was the chief of staff of the peace process talks. She's the chief of staff to George Mitchell. And this guy, in his loud accent, said, Malta Pope, Malta Pope. And she thought he was saying, Malta? And it was Martha he was trying to say, but she couldn't hear that. And she couldn't understand what the hell the guy was saying. So 2 of these calls were just badly bungled, and she could barely tell he was talking about Omagh, never mind where in the town it was. But the bomb had already been placed at that point. So the police weren't even in a position to start the evacuation until the car had been parked. Secondly, the much more important bit of nonsense in this ridiculous explanation given by McKevitt, if in fact he said it at all, is that they parked in front of a shop called S.D. Kells. Mr. Kells, I interviewed him in the early 90s. He was a former Ulster Defence Regiment, local regiment of the British Army, Ulster Defence Regiment colonel. The Provisional IRA had tried to kill him several times. He ran a network of shops in County Fermanagh, in Tyrone, including in Omagh, that sold school clothing. But his shops, the S.D. Kells shops, had been targeted repeatedly. He was shot and wounded behind the counter of his shop in, I think, Lisnaskea in Fermanagh about a decade before this. So the people who placed that bomb put it there because he was a target Okay, so this idea that the bomb was placed there by accident or because somehow the police forced them there is total, pardon my French, horseshit.
Blame for Omagh was not something anyone wanted. The Real IRA reluctantly took credit for the bomb. The Continuity IRA never did. Even though militants may have wanted to blame the British with some sort of rationality, the target was on their back.
In the years following Omagh, the victims' families would push for answers about why so many people had to die and suffer severe injuries in the deadly attack. A highly placed British agent within the IRA, who went by the name Kevin Fulton, would come forward to say he gave fairly specific warnings to his handlers that something was coming in the north that weekend. Republican dissidents opposed to the peace process took this as confirmation of their theory that British intelligence knew more than they let on and wanted civilian deaths to embarrass and undercut the dissident groups. Former Republican Sinn Féin President Des Dalton, who you heard from in the last episode, described the social and political aftermath of the bombing.
There were questions about the circumstances surrounding it. And I think that's even emerged, or more questions have emerged as the years have passed. And I know Village magazine, for instance, did a particularly revealing and interesting series of articles on it over the last number of years, which pose a serious question to which have not been answered in terms of the role of British intelligence and so on, their knowledge, their foreknowledge of that car and why it went there. And I mean, the oldest question in the world is who gained most from it, and who gained most from it were the two states.
As we've mentioned in the past, the IRA has a tradition of taking responsibility for its actions, even grave mistakes. The Real IRA admitted responsibility for the bombing in Omagh, but some Republicans simply refused to acknowledge that Irishmen were capable of it. Amid debates whether police could have done more to save civilian lives, one fact was never seriously challenged. The bombs were planted in Omagh's downtown shopping district on a holiday weekend by dissident Republicans.
I also, and I would say this, and I have said this, and I've said this to Republicans as well, that yes, those questions need to be asked. Absolutely, they need to be asked. And I think the responsibility of the state, particularly the two states, the British state and the Southern Irish state, and their foreknowledge of what was happening at Omagh needs to be teased out. But I think Republicans also need to put their hand up and say it was wrong.
Republican leaders like Gerry Adams condemned the bombing, but did not like being prodded to help go after fellow Republicans responsible for the atrocity. Here's journalist Sean O'Driscoll, author of The Accidental Spy.
Even after the Omagh bombing, I remember an answer from Gerry Adams when he was in Washington. I asked very specifically, is it not now time? Would you not call on Provisional IRA members living along the border to tell the Northern Ireland Police or the Gardaí in the South what they know about the Omagh bombing? And he cheered me out, and he was like, I would, question why you would ask that question at this time. And somebody afterwards came up to me and said, God, he didn't like that at all. There was great personal animosity between Mickey McKevitt and Provisional IRA leaders. They had a meeting in Donegal, and he walked out of it with his wife and others, which was the beginning of the Real IRA. And they still couldn't bring them, Martin McGuinness or Gerry Adams, to say, if you know something, if you saw a certain car moving along the border on 15th of August 1998, please come forward. They would not do that.
It's a long, frustrating effort for the victims' families trying to hold those responsible accountable. No criminal charges have ever stuck in this case, which has led to even more frustration among the communities of Northern Ireland. The bombing was an atrocity, the likes of which hadn't been seen in the Northern Irish conflict before. A first responder later described what he saw to the BBC. There were bodies scattered all over the street. Many had been covered. There were body parts, pieces of brain, pieces of arms, pieces of legs. There was a torrent of water flowing down the street. There were electrical cables sparking. There were roof slates falling onto the road nearby. It was a scene from hell. How could anyone who was part of the Irish community, north or south, be capable of such a callous act? 31 dead, hundreds injured. It was the last straw for many across the Emerald Isle. Many who may have tolerated the IRA or even tacitly supported their goal in years past are finished with the violence. It was time for peace. The British and Irish governments wanted the IRA out of the picture.
After Omagh, I didn't know who was going to kill me because he didn't know how that was going to settle. And I was a known member of continuity IRA. So to speak. So you don't know if the provisionals are going to be looking for you, or if the whatever very loyalist group will be looking for you, or if the guys will be looking for you.
Dave says after Omagh, he felt like there was a target on his back, but he didn't know who might be after him. He's friends with Joe O'Neill and is a known associate of the Continuity IRA. He's not only worried about the Garda coming after him, but maybe even other paramilitary groups looking to shut down the factions that had a hand in Omagh.
They fuck everybody out of me. And yet they left the country at it. And they'll talk about in some of the news articles about why are you get out of the country? And what we wanted to get out of the country because we didn't know if we wanted to get unstable. It was going to turn into, that was a real serious event.
Dave sends this email to his handlers 10 days after Omagh.
I am sure how the new laws are to be used on everyone is on his mind. All this just with the flow of business that he has on a daily basis with the bar and the realty. Joe always told me casualties are a fact of war, and we are at war with the Brits. If they weren't here, there would be no bombs. I know he felt horrible for the casualties, but how far that really extended beyond the initial shock, I wouldn't count on. Everyone seems to be afraid that if they show any sympathy at all, however small, to any of the Republican movements, that they will be tarred with the same brush as those that carried out the bombing in Omagh.
The quote, new laws Dave alludes to are amendments to the Offenses Against the State Act. That law was enacted just before World War II in order to prosecute those who might disrupt Ireland's neutral status. The Republic is again looking for broad authority to jail those responsible for violence. So the government returned to the law that had been in place for more than 50 years. It was responsible for the establishment of a juryless court called the Special Criminal Court. The Offenses Against the State Act. After the Omagh bomb, the Dáil Ireland's government, amended the law to include a new provision similar to the RICO statute here in America. They add a new charge called directing terrorism. Anyone who was actively involved with a group connected to a terror attack could be prosecuted in the Special Criminal Court. Critics have called the amendments extremely draconian, and Ireland's Special Criminal Court has been condemned by Amnesty International. It's an all-in move by the government of the Republic to go after those who would jeopardize the nascent peace forming in the North.
In October 2000, the BBC program Panorama aired a documentary brazenly listing 4 main suspects in the bombing, all of whom were associated with Mickey McKevitt's Real IRA. At this point, Dave really hasn't heard much about Mickey McKevitt, but the hardliner who left his post as quartermaster of the Provisional IRA, the man who knows where the weapons are buried, leads the breakaway faction that will come to be known as the Real IRA, the splinter group that took credit for the Omagh bomb. McKevitt is losing friends and public support in the wake of the Omagh bombing. According to news accounts, he and his wife are all but chased out of their home by outraged neighbors. Soon McKevitt will hear that Joe O'Neill has a wealthy operative bringing cash and computer know-how from the United States, and he'll make it his business to meet him. Dave will start hanging out with a legend of the movement named Mickey Donnelly, a leader of Republican Sinn Féin in the town of Derry in Northern Ireland.
They're sending one to McKevitt, and so Mickey's going to McKevitt singing, listen, we need to steal this guy from McKevitt. So McKevitt wants it, because the first time that I told the bit that, I'm supposed to hear Mickey McKevitt, no way. Who's not going to meet you? It'll fuck you,
Donnelly could be the next big link in the chain that will lead Dave to McKevitt. That's next time on Underbelly, the Rebel Kind. liked this episode of The Rebel Kind, you could do us a favor by leaving a positive review on whatever hosting service you're listening to us on.
The Rebel Kind is created and hosted by Bob Hergeth and Abden Palish. Executive producer, Anjay Nagpal. Written by Dalton Main, Abden Palish, and Bob Hergeth. Senior producer, Dalton Main.
Editing and sound design by Catherine Anderson. Original music by Dale Eisinger. Mixing by Gerard Bauer. Show art by Rebecca Hendon.
Our show was recorded in the podcast studio at Roosevelt University. The development producers were Danielle Elliott and Jen Swan.
Marketing support from Tessa Cairns Clay. Production legal by Bruns, Brennan, and Barry. Legal clearance fair use by Rachel Strom at Davis Wright Tremaine.
From Entropy Media, the Underbelly series was created by Anjay Nagpal. Executive producer, Josh Fielstad. Executive producer, Gerard Bauer. Head of operations is Nuna Ebo. Project manager is Sebastian Perry. Associate producer, Heidi Rudvoets. Development and production support, Simona Kessler.
Special thanks to Flimnick Roberts for calling us in 20 years ago. This series is dedicated to the innocent victims of Northern Ireland's decades of violence.